record to the cloud. Pick that up. All right. So yeah, I guess as a start, guys, y'all just want to introduce yourselves?
For sure. You want to go first, Elijah?
Yes. My name is Elijah Pringle, and I guess I'm the elder of the group, but I'm still the youngest in mine. I am a writer, and I formerly was a training director at a Fortune 10 company, and now I'm happily retired, and all I'm doing is learning.
Yes, yes, as are all of us. What about you, Enoch?
So I go by Enoch the Poet, born and raised on the north side of Wilmington, Delaware. That north side part is super important, but I now am living in Philly. I am a poet, author, manga writer, and the executive publisher of Black Minds Publishing LLC, which is a national publications platform geared towards the personal and professional growth of Black creators. And that's me.
There we go. There we go. I'm Warren Christopher Longmire, writer, poet, educator, and the releaser of Open Source, new book out of Radiator Press right here in Philly, among other things. And yeah, guys, so y'all both had a chance to read over the book, and I respect like both of your work and just your opinions and your thoughts and your minds very much. So as a start, yeah, you got any just like general questions or impacts off of the book, or general questions for me?
I'm always curious, what was the thought process behind the shape of the book, like going with this rectangular vibe? What was the thought process behind that?
It was not my original intention. What was cool about this book is that it was the first time that I've gone through kind of like a full length publication process. So there were a lot of pieces of that I didn't know, and I pay a lot of attention, like being in digital media. Like I pay a lot of attention to layout and font size and position of poems on the page and stuff like that. So I kind of had an idea of how I wanted my poems to look at the very beginning. But I'm working with Radiator, so they have a separate designer that they're working with. So it was kind of like in talks with the designer. She wanted to. I do a lot of prose poems, and she wanted to try to keep the integrity of the line lengths as they were. And so she was like, yeah, let's just, let's just roll with it and see how it feels. And I went along with it. So I like it. I mean, it feels like an object, it feels like I love the texture on the outside. It feels like a block of stone, sort of. So it's got a kind of weight that I like to it. So I think it worked out.
Yeah, I love it myself. But, from a different perspective, I love the layout because it follows the natural eye, because the eye actually sees not in portrait, but in landscape. So I love the way that, just with the way it laid out, it sort of unfolded before you. I mean, and that, I'm just saying psychologically, I know that that's what goes on when you're looking at something, when you're looking at it in landscape. So I love the layout. I thought it was really smart. It allowed the reader to, I think, find themselves in the poem. And I agree with you, Warren. One of the things I loved about almost everything I read here was that you really were painting on the page with words. It didn't feel like layout per se. It felt more like a piece of art. And I think that people, when they look at a poem, they visually absorb it first. And the book is very digestible in that sense. Now, the intellectual part of the book.
It was coming.
The intellectual part of the book, it reminded me of the fun of a Rubik's Cube. Because I'm looking at all the stuff that you're doing. And as you read more into the book, you start to turn it and twist. And then I went back to some of the previous poem. Then it started to make, oh, I get it now. So I also love that part about the book. The book really, it has a stream of consciousness about it, but there's a control, I guess you could say, about it. And it does kind of, to me, sort of reveals itself like a Rubik's Cube, because as you move the pieces around, the poems around in your head, it really kind of reveals what you're talking about. So I love that. I thought this was a great love letter to Philadelphia and to North Philly in particular. Yay, North Philly.
Of course, all day, every day.
What was the thought process behind the title as well, open source?
I was originally, as I have in the first introduction, I was thinking about calling the whole thing Hooptee, because you know, it was kind of inspired by Nick Mitchell, I think his name, like Finna, and like the idea of kind of like taking, you know, like words that come out of you know, my past and come out of slang. But, you know, I mean, I really like the idea of it being in the first section. So that was actually a suggestion by Ryan Eckes, like my editor, and the head of Radiator Press. And I thought it was really good because, you know, I mean, the idea of my technical background is something that I definitely wanted to play with and to explore. Open source as an idea in technology of just kind of like the only way that you make products that actually work is by giving them away for free and by exposing everything. And that's really the basis of internet technology is based on the idea that the most important tools have to be given away for free. And that if you try to hold them, then you're not going to be able to improve them as fast as everyone can do with passion, you know? And so that is also an idea that I really like in thinking about this book as just as a personal act. And this is a really personal book for me. I said a lot that this is a book that I felt like by the time I was getting to the end of it, that I was going to survive more than I was going to finish, because there's so much fear that was involved in kind of like building it and a lot of the places that I went to in it. But I felt that I was finally at a place as a writer where unless I did that, I would never be free to be able to make whatever other work that I wanted to make. So yeah, just when Ryan suggested it, and it has the technical aspect, it felt like it kind of like brought everything together.
I mean, even in saying that, that last part about, you know, I would never be free as a writer unless I gave this away is literally, you know, that definition of open source that you just gave, in the sense of I can't evolve until I expose these things about myself and my personhood and where I'm at in life in order to, you know, move past that. And so in that way, it's a very apt title for sure. Especially like, and I know we're probably going to get to this eventually, but especially when I think about the autoimmune section.
Right.
Yeah. If that's on the tip of the tongue, we can go into that right now. You know, I'm going to put in some time stamps so we can, we could. Yeah. So definitely that was in a lot of ways, you know, I've been working on those poems in one way or another for, I mean, say about like 3 or so years, you know? You know, like just different things that have happened. I mean, even kind of getting to the point where I could say openly that I was molested, or kind of like conceptualize it on that level, you know, was something that took a lot of time. And I feel like even now, it's only been in the last 5 years that I've really been able to conceptualize that, you know what I mean? And also during that time, you know, there was a lot that's been going on with my father, and which also plays a lot into that section. And so, yeah, I mean, it's putting it all together was definitely interesting, and finding a way to find like an arc that went along with it. But it's definitely, scariest part of the book.
So, I mean, I'm just curious, in this section, what did you discover about yourself that you didn't discover? Like sometimes when we read a poem that we've written, we realize that we said something that we didn't realize we said. What were those kind of discovery in this section? Because it is very personal. This was a difficult section to go through.
I'm sure it was. Yeah, it was a difficult section to write.
I know. That's what I said. As bad as it is to read this, not bad, but you know what I'm saying? It was like, it really felt like the pleasure of removing a scab.
Yeah, it hurt. It hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. And it was nice as it went through. It was just, I mean, what did I discover inside of it? I mean, a lot of it was just giving myself permission to be able to talk about it and to talk about these places of vulnerability and not to feel fear that something bad was going to happen because I was saying it, because I was owning it. And yeah, I mean, like a lot of it, like when I first started doing some of these poems on stage, I've always had men that have come up to me afterwards and talk about things that have happened to them, or you know, that happened to nephews, or you know, or something like that. And so it felt important to just once again, yeah, just like allow myself to just have it. I don't know. I mean, like it feels really, once it was finally out, it just felt really good to just feel like I didn't have anything to hide. I mean, what it was really interesting thinking about how much, I don't think I realized how much, you know, because I was molested by my doctor, like by a pediatrician back when I was a kid. And I didn't realize how much that influenced my relationship with the medical industry and things like that. And that it was something not until I really put all of the poems together did I see that journey. So that was definitely really interesting. Yeah, intersections of it with mental health, you know.
Yeah, there were a lot of oh, go ahead, Elijah, you got it.
No, I was gonna say that I'm gonna be pushy. And are you able to read Autoimmune 3 by any chance?
Sure.
Which you did? Because that was the one that I got stuck on, and I also got stuck on one line that or one image about your father wanting to die, where he showed you how to skip rocks. I thought it was really,
yeah,
that kind of like gave me a full circle moment. But if you could read 3, I really would like to hear that in your voice, as opposed to my mind.
Autoimmune 3. My last serious asthma attack, the 40-year-old Philly Italian nurse calling me a wimp as I heaved tight in my slipping half naked 3 a.m. at night. The albuterol coursing, seized limbs, fetal bud of my porn torso, so small now, familiar strangeness of a stranger's joy at a good black humbling, the joke of my hyperventilation writing itself. That's the poem. So yeah, I mean, that's a true story. You know, I mean, I have, that might have been off of a peanut allergy, but every once in a while, I've been allergic to peanuts since I was a kid. And, you know, like once every 2 years, they'll just slip into something. But yeah, I remember I was at Hahnemann, I think. And yeah, like really late, and they didn't really have space. So I was just kind of like in a hallway with, you know, like my slip on, and there was this one nurse that was there, and I just couldn't breathe at all. And she just kept telling me that I was a wimp, or that I should be able to take it and all this. And I just did not understand. And I was kind of like pleading with her, like just to try to understand why it was that she was treating me this way when I was gasping for air. And I knew why, you know?
Right.
Yeah. But the fact that it just seemed so cruel in a way that I really couldn't understand. And the thing about albuterol, you know, like when they shoot it into you, like directly through an IV sometimes, is that it's basically like, you know, it's like getting an adrenaline shot. So, you know, you just start to shake and kind of like, you know, twist into yourself. Something that my dad has dealt with over his entire life, because you still need it to kind of survive that moment. And, you know, I was in and out of the hospital through a lot of my life for asthma attacks along those lines too. So, you know, that was happening during that whole time. And
I mean, what I thought was interesting about the poem is that I'm a big one on not hitting people over the head with messages. I believe that if you just simply write about life and just lay it out there, the lessons are there to be seen. And I think that without preaching, you kind of talk about how Black males are seen by the medical industry. You know, they don't see us as worth saving. So when I read this piece, it took me back to a situation that I remember having at Temple Hospital. And that's what I love about this piece, was that I think that we all have our stories like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the fact that you didn't do a condemnation or a celebration. You just laid it out there. As far as the structure, I love the echoing that you have in this poem. It's very subtle, slipping, strangeness, stranger. That echoing, I think, is really kind of, I love the way the poem reverberates. I mean, it kind of almost has that staggered breathing effect as well. So, I love this piece from beginning to end. It's a tight poem, really tight poem. I'm just curious, Enoch, I'm not trying to interview you guys, but I'm just curious. Enoch,
this is why I have you here.
Have you ever had that kind of experience with the interaction with the medical industry that this poem is really kind of suggesting at without pointing the finger?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, in general, I used to have asthma as a child, and then I eventually grew out of it. But I have had horrible experiences with the medical industry, which is actually why I don't take medicine. Because it started, my first really bad experience was when I got my tonsils taken out in 4th grade, and they overdosed me on an anesthesia that I was allergic to. So not only did I sleep for an entire 24 hours after surgery, once I was out of the hospital, I couldn't keep any food down, and I was literally out of school for 4 months. I broke out in hives. My stomach was all messed up. It was like a whole thing. And then even in my adult life, most recently, I found out I had a gluten allergy, but I didn't find that out from my dermatologist. I've been going back and forth to the dermatologist for the past 2 years, from 2019 to 2021, trying to figure out what was going on with me. Like, my skin was bursting and oozing, and it was all over my arms and everything. And they just kept telling me it was eczema. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is not eczema. Like, I have eczema. This is not how eczema looks when it appears on my body. And they were just like, well, sometimes it just looks different on Black people. And I'm like, that's not this, right?
Ooh.
And I happened to go to brunch with my father, who had a friend who had a similar thing. And then he's the one who brought it up to me. And then I went to an allergenist who confirmed it, right? And had I not had that brunch with my father, none of these things would have got solved, and I probably would still be breaking out and oozing and having all these ailments physically, because no one would have told me it was a gluten allergy. And I asked them to run more tests, and they was just like, nah, that's not necessary. And so I definitely resonate with a lot of the medical treatment, even when we're talking about in Autoimmune 1, where the nurse is like, yeah, but I bet he was useless at home. I bet he's never learned how to cook.
Right.
And I found myself in reading this autoimmune section. I think so far of what I've read, this is the section that spoke to me the most, because I drew a lot of parallels outside of the medical field, right? And I don't know if you put these things, I don't know if that was your intent, but I went into a bunch of different places with it. Because one, I was thinking about, to have an autoimmune disease in and of itself, which I know y'all already know is having a thing that is causing the body to fight itself. And when I think about the constructs of how we're taught to be masculine, so not masculinity as the general holistic idea, but masculinity as a social construct, it does operate very much like an autoimmune disease, right? Because we're taught to do things that don't benefit us. They harm us, just like they harm people outside of our identified group. But then I also was thinking about I think it was Autoimmune 2, where you said your father is fine, says his raisioning chest, right? And I think about the ways in which we perform this okayness, even though everything about us, from the way we're operating to the way we're presenting physically, is showing that we're not good, right? And even though that's happening, even though that's occurring, because that doesn't fit into the construct of what it means socially to be a man, no one around us is taking the necessary steps to move us into being able to state that either, right? Like one thing I've really been grappling with lately is there's a lot, and this, my grappling hasn't been just with like men, but it's been in general. But there are a lot of ways in which we have people in our lives who are not vulnerable, and we request vulnerability of them without creating an environment that inspires the vulnerability, right? And so it's like, I'm asking you to do this thing that I'm not making a safe space for you to do. You feel me? Then I took it into a whole other realm also, because like with the line of like, I bet he doesn't cook and like all these things, very much was my experience with my last partner and meeting her family. It's like there were all these preconceived notions about me because I'm a Black guy and like the perception of like what men generally are, that it's like we're having conversations and instead of asking me questions or instead of getting to know me, there are just these blanketed statements being made. And on one end, I'm like, yo, I get it. You may have these experiences, you know, have these situations where whether it be firsthand trauma or secondhand trauma that inform this. And I understand that. And at the same time, me logically understanding where this comes from doesn't make it okay for me to experience it, right? That's two different things. And so I was thinking about a lot of that while I was reading this. Cause yeah, I think autoimmune, that whole section just really is a good microscope of that tightrope that we walk, where specifically as Black men, we hold socially conflicting identities, I'll say. And that creates like a whole separate experience that doesn't really fit on either side, and also creates a lot of trauma for us. You feel me? Like a lot of trauma. Because we also don't remember that patriarchy is a whole system that affects more than men. You can be a misogynist and not be a man, right? Like, and so it's like I can experience misogyny from the nurse or, you know, the girlfriend or my sister. Like it could come from anywhere. You feel me? And it will still impact me and inform these ways of like unintentional, conditioned self-harm that I think is how I'm just supposed to exist. Right. So that was a small tangent, but yeah, like
tangent at all. I mean, like those are all ideas that I am, you know, that I'm definitely trying to grapple with as directly, and also just kind of like in experience as much as possible. Kind of like going back to what Elijah was saying, because I think there's a real danger when you're approaching these kind of situations, you know, these kind of poems as a man, where it just becomes, I don't know, it just stays really abstract, and you're just kind of like you're steeped just in the anger, and it's not about just like the experience. And and I really, one of the things that made this section so hard is that I knew that the only way that I could even think that I could be accepted in this section was just to talk about what actually happened. And to let that stand on its own. So that's why, like Elijah, so much of this section is like that, with just the other ones that are kind of reflections as intercom.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the thing that I love the most about this, I always say that writing poetry out of anger is the easiest thing to do. Writing poems for understanding is the most difficult. And I think that in this section, you bring in understanding. Now, to me, the other challenge, because, you know, I'm a business person, is this section, me reading it relates to me and makes me understand I'm not alone. But how, and not that you have to do this, but this is something I think that others need to read. This is educational for them. It's like, how do you get to that audience? Do you want that other audience to hear this story or understand this story?
Yeah, I mean, that's been something that I've been struggling with. I mean, I've been wanting to talk to Enoch, like specifically, you know, even offline, because, you know, this is something that you've really made a focus of your poetry, and it's been, and of your practice in general. And that's been something that, you know, I mean, like I got into poetry because I like words, and I used to like putting words together, you know what I mean? And so through my career, it's just, I've had such a strong push against that, you know, and I just didn't want for my poetry to be for that. And also, you know, I mean, like in reading these poems out loud and kind of like confronting the idea of having to accept men, and Black men specifically, as victims of domestic violence or as victims of sexual abuse. And of, you know, like, I mean, definitely acknowledging the effect of being in a male dominated and, you know, like, you know, in a Western dominated and a capitalist dominated society, while at the same time not feeling like that justifies taking away anybody's individuality or humanity, you know what I mean? And just, I don't know. I mean, like, it's a really scary thing. And in trying to have like straight up conversations about this kind of things and advocate for myself, even in the face of like straight up domestic violence that is being done to me, it's a hard thing to kind of get across. So yeah, I mean, like, I'm like having this conversation with the both of you. I feel like, I mean, I wanted to do this specifically on a platform like Blue Stoop in order to start that and to start thinking about it, to have a conversation with both of you, period, inside of this as a Blue Stoop thing or outside is a big part of that. And, you know, I mean, I'm still thinking in general about like just going out and reading from the book and doing kind of more events around the book. But yeah, if this gets in, like, shout out to Black Men Heal. Like, they definitely were there for me at a time.
Oh, really dope.
Yeah,
really dope.
Amazing organization.
So Warren, how difficult is it really for you to accept your role as a writer of influence? Because that's it's a hard thing to do, because it almost seems egotistical, but the truth of the matter is, you didn't ask for the talent. You didn't ask for any of this. But you've been given it. So yeah. So how do you accept that role, or are you still in the process of accepting this role?
Yeah, my man. I mean, I'm still, this book was a huge step, and I feel so much freer, regardless of if anybody reads it. I feel so much freer personally now that it's out, that just my family life didn't completely collapse, that I wasn't canceled. You know what I mean? And so the fact that I can do that, and I've been getting nothing but love, you know, from the people that have been coming at me. Like, I think I just needed to be able to do that. And the book was only just released in December. So I feel like I'm very much in a new era of my life as a poet. And now I understand that this is just a very important step for me professionally that I had to do in order to start to think about, you know, the responsibility of the poet.
Yeah, can I hear you say, I'm a poet of importance? I want to hear you say that.
I am a poet of importance.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm saying that is that I think that I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and I think that we were always condemned to celebrate ourselves because it was seen as conceit. And I'm just saying that I always try to make people say, admit to who you are. Like, for instance, I know that you're a math person, and I'm going to pick on the poem that's on page 68, which I kind of loved. Because
all right, so at this point, we're inside of, I mean, there's so much.
I think
more.
it's in the last section.
Talk to y'all individually. There's so much more about, and also I just want to say on Autoimmune, like, every single story in there is true. Like, every single story.
Oh, yeah, it has to be.
Yeah. It read like it was true. It definitely. There was no part that I read where I was like, did this really happen this way? And all of it read in a very believable way. And I think your voice is very consistent throughout all the sections. And I think that also enhances the believability, because it's like, yo, he's not changing character. He's not performing as somebody else. All of these poems are worn, and there's a theme. I think there's a grappling that's occurring in a lot of the work, and it's a consistent grappling. And when I see things like that, that also to me says like, this is an authentic experience, because I can pinpoint the threads, or I'm a big fan of like fractals and just like the concept of like repeating patterns. I mean, my whole last book was based on it. And so I'm like, the fractals that I see in this is like, yeah, this is definitely, it definitely felt as authentic as I believe it was.
Right, which I got at home, by the way. I wish do I have it around? I took it on vacation with me, bro. I'm looking through.
Hey, yeah.
You know what I mean?
I appreciate that, yo.
Absolutely. Let me not front. Yeah. And I've loved what I've read so far. Like, look out.
Word, thank you.
Yeah, so we want to talk about No One Knows What They're Doing at Microsoft? Is that what that's what we
no, it's the function poem.
Oh yeah, that was in No One Knows What They're Doing at Microsoft. So that's
right.
So,
you can define as a function, for example, sprint. A given event is to 1, give, 2, hard, 3, hope something back, and you get a gist of burning legs for an hour and maybe a mile in an inch. It's variable. Friends, how much? Honestly. And the thing about it is, I do my imitation of Warren Longmire, and when you read these poems, you can do your imitation of you. And the fact that your cadence comes through, your breathing, which is really kind of funny. I mean, and I don't know if that's because you had asthma, but that's what I often get with your writing, is I always feel this breathing effect, especially when you're reading out loud.
Yeah, I mean, as I get older, it asserts itself even more. But I mean, coming from a slam and a performance background, I mean, like there's nothing that compares still with just like the power of performing poems in front of people, and the power of just like performance in a way that you can just like, you have that, you're at the center and you can just control the energy and you can but I mean, it's been great to kind of move more into poems on the page and see ways that you can replicate that to an extent. So yeah,
how did you do that?
I mean, like the breaths are definitely a thing, I mean, student of jazz, Thelonious Monk always said that the real music is in the pauses, the real music is in the silences. And so really thinking about, cutting things off, whenever you make a line break, you're giving something weight. And, and whether people catch on to it consciously or unconsciously, there's a weight there. And there's just, whenever you make space in between those things, you are giving physical space, and the eye can pick up on those things in the same way that they do in a visual piece, So yeah, everything is always, grouping things together, just very naturally groups things together. And so you're just unconsciously going to have that same feel.
What made you, and maybe this is like tech ignorance that I have.
That's cool.
But what made you choose the word sprint? Because you could have chose like any word for the function poem, right? Because it was just like a dictionary at your disposal type of thing, right? So what made you choose that word?
I mean, it's a verb. And I think for the idea function, hopefully that comes across at least, that, I'm just trying to kind of like build the idea of a function. And what a function is in programming is just a verb. It's you kind of like finding a way of making, you're creating a custom definition that has a certain process that's behind it. Very much in the same way of what we do. And so, but sprint, we have an immediate connection with what it means, but the whole point of the poem and the whole point of functions is that depending on what you give it, like it can also do so many other things. So sprint felt flexible enough where it's sharp, but you can sprint a whole lot of things. And it felt like it started to get that idea of kind of like how functions function in programming, and how that's something that we think about anyway in real life.
Word.
I'm just curious. what do you hear? Do you hear the word first or do you hear the sound first? Because I'm reading your work, and I'll be honest with you, I can't even answer that. There's sometimes when your words are so, perfectly chosen, and then there's sometimes I hear the musicality of some of the other pieces where it seemed like the sound was more important. So I'm just curious, where do you line in that?
I hear the sound first, for sure. Student of jazz, student of hip hop, and so it's kind of like, for me, I don't know, that's the easiest way for me to enter into a poem. Like, I have a lot of, I might have ideas or kind of like a general theme that I want to follow, but just kind of putting words together that sound good is my easiest way to just kind of get a first draft out, and the meaning just kind of gets massaged based on whatever comes out of that. And also, I think that when I find that when I'm concentrating on sound, it gives me a lot more flexibility with meaning, because if it sounds good enough, I don't have to make it as concrete, and I can let people figure out the meaning later on, but they're still gonna like it because it sounds interesting, or it just has interesting images in it.
You like that, John?
Oh yeah.
I know I'm from North Philly, and I probably say the word John the most incorrectly ever, but I love the word myself.
But I mean, is there an incorrect way to do slang? It's all transformable.
Yes, there is an incorrect way. Absolutely.
Thank you. I love you both.
I be back and forth because I feel you. I be back and forth because I'll definitely hear somebody use a word and I'm like, that's not it. And then at the same time, I will definitely just completely make something up and use it in conversation like it is generally understood. Like, I be saying jigging, it's not a thing, right? But I'll see somebody acting dumb and I'm like, oh boy, jigging. Yeah. And everybody around me would just be like, yeah, I feel you. But it's like, that's not a thing. It's completely made up. And no one else is saying this but me. So yeah, it'd be
slang. I feel like there's so much I feel like, like one of the things about the way that Black people talk to each other is that so much works on what's understood. And so it's kind of like, it allows for there to be a lot more flexibility and change in language. Because we come from the same like basic kind of place, and we know we have these like rhythms that are inside of us. So we could just say any old word, and as long as it's like in the right place and it fits musically in a certain place, like the meaning just comes through. And that is also that's a big reason why my poetry like is the way it is, for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's something I feel like you do often in this book as well, is like mix words together that are not standardly mixed together, or like you'll take two words and just smash them and then they're one word. And there was a good amount of that in the book as well that gave it almost like it's like you're writing technically and then like doing something, for lack of a better phrase, it's like uncouth. And it gives me the energy of like it reminds me of like me at University of Delaware, right? I graduated from University of Delaware. I'm at this PWI with all these like prestigious people, but like I'm like 1,000% a nigga still, right? I don't even know if I can say that on Booster. Like I'm like showing up as my regular North Wilmington self on this campus, but my grades are higher than some of theirs, right? I can show up and talk the PhD language, but it's like if you catch me in a regular conversation, I'm doing both things, right? I'll say something like splendiferous in the same conversation where I say John, and they might be in the same sentence, right? And it's like the poems give me that vibe sometimes, depending on how you use the words, which I thought was cool.
I appreciate that, man. I mean, like this is where I'm from, and kind of getting to the point where you don't feel like you have to code switch. It was like, this is just who I am. This is just the way that I talk. And I think that, that the way that Black America just understands and works with language is just brilliant, and yeah, I mean, obviously that's something that I always want to, that I want to celebrate. And I can't, it's me. Like that's it just is what it is. I guess with that, do we want to talk about the Hooptee section right fast?
Yeah, we can go to that.
That I know in Pigeon specifically about John.
I like that you open the book with the Hooptee section. That is all about, this is where I'm from. And actually, it reminds me of one of my 7th graders recently. We were doing a workshop. What was it? I don't even remember what I was teaching them. It was a good workshop though, because I was teaching it. But whatever the prompt was, she had wrote, "When people look at me, they don't see my great grandmother." And then she like went down this list of like the experiences and people, or specifically the people and their experiences that go into like who she is right now. And this very much put me in that similar space of like, there's so much context that is necessary for understanding a human being fully when you're interacting with them. So much context that we don't even really search for, because we oftentimes just move off whatever is presented to us instead of digging deeper and inquiring.
Right.
And so opening this book as a Philly poet with like your experience of Philadelphia, I feel like lays a good foundation for us to build all these other experiences off of, because at the end of the day, everybody's starting point is their environment to some degree. So yeah, I thought that was cool.
Yeah, and actually, if I could, there was what you were talking about, Enoch. There was a passage I had to circle it because it blew me away, and I'm gonna put on the reading glasses now. And it was, "Old folks still rest content on a front porch, sleeping in the shade as if Africa wasn't a memory." That I thought was just I think that was just such brilliance. And like I said, once again, it doesn't condemn, it reveals. And that line just like blew me away. I had to circle. There were a couple other ones that I thought, full base and roast meat was awesome there. And to me, I'm looking at that as a within the sentence, I'm like going, there should be an article there somewhere, but it's like, it doesn't have to be an article there. It doesn't have to, it is like you really just present this language and this sound. And I agree with you. You kind of remind me of Picasso, who I think is the most maligned and most misunderstood painter ever, was that he painted very, he was a realist. He really could, he was a copyist almost. But he learned the basics so well. He learned how to do it so well that he learned to distort on that. So when you see things clearly, you can distort, as opposed to just simply people who just distort from the beginning, they don't have no understanding. So I love the fact that you have this understanding and then you kind of distort it a little bit. And it kind of reminds me of Picasso in a way. So I guess you're our Picasso poet from North Philly.
I'll take it, man. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely. Just with the approach, it reminds me of the first time I took a drawing class, and my teacher said, like, everybody can draw. It's just that most people can't see. When you put somebody in front of a table and you tell them to draw a table, a lot of times they'll draw, they'll draw like a square, and then they'll draw legs and like that. They'll draw an idea of a table, but they won't draw just like the shadow, and they won't draw kind of like a line of light. They don't draw the actual shapes that are coming into their eye because they're so caught up inside of the ideas of things. And I mean, like as much as possible in poetry, I like to think that way too, that, you just put whatever words are necessary just to give the impression of what, feeling, even more so than image, what feeling you want to be inside of the mind of the person. So for me, I mean, like every syllable I count, like summer still hums with full bass and roast meat, where fear lives, the loudest sounds I heard was laughter. Like it has to be that way because of the flow of being inside of it. And hopefully that comes off on the page. So
I was living in what you were just teaching me about that most people, it's not that they can't draw, they can't see.
Oh my God, changed my life.
That was a bar. That was a bar.
Yes.
And I feel like it applies. You literally can apply that to everything, right? Because I even think about when I'm teaching poetry, the one thing that I always struggle to like formulate for the students, so I just have to like show them by example, is how my brain works. Like how I can make, because to me at least, a lot of poetry is about relation or comparison. How well can I take a thing and then connect it to this other thing and then flesh that out? And that's like, everybody can write, you feel me? Like everyone has the ability to write down words, put words together, but not all of us have the vision of how to do it in a way that fulfills delivering like this message. That was a bar. I was stuck on that for like a good 2 minutes of you talking for real.
Thought, you know, because I mean, at the same time, like there's not as much. I don't do a whole lot of like direct metaphor necessarily inside. I like the language and the images to kind of be what they are, and the connections that people make because images are beside each other are just the connections that they make, you know. And for me, it's kind of like letting, you know, it's the same thing. It's like, in some ways, I don't want the idea to get in the way of just the reality that you're living inside in the poem. So yeah, that was an amazing teacher. It definitely changed the way of art in general.
They sound fuego. There was also, I feel like you did a good job of capturing the friction between Philadelphia being a loving space and also a space where you can fucking die. Right? Like, but not like in a regular like die of old age type way. It's like you can get popped on the subway, right? And both of these things are real and exist in the same space, right? It's like, not to draw too stark of a comparison, but it's like the father that will go too far when he's beating you and also like cook you a really good meal and watch his favorite movie with you. And it's like, how do we reconcile, you know, those two things? And I feel like, I don't think you were trying to reconcile them in the work as much as like just continuing or starting off since the beginning of the book, that pathway of like, I'm just gonna lay these things out and make of it whatever you can. Which I think is dope because it also reminds me of, you know how they say like the best leader is the person who doesn't want to be the leader, right? And I think sometimes the best poems are the poems that aren't trying to get us to think any specific way. And so
I was looking, I can't remember where, but there was one poem, I don't know if it's in this section, where you said you mentioned the father beating the son for dancing.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if it was in this section, but when you were talking, Enoch, that's the thing that came to my mind about.
That came to my mind too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is harsh. I mean, you know, going around, it's like we can be very the relationship in, you know, that I saw in the hood between like Black parents and Black children can be very fraught. And you know, like it makes sense. Like you want to protect people because you know that at any second death can just be there. So, you know, you got to make sure that people, and also, you know, that, you know, especially if you're trying to raise a young Black man, and really regardless, that anybody can interpret anything you do as aggressive. So you got to constantly keep yourself in check. You probably shouldn't talk too much. You probably shouldn't dance too much. You definitely shouldn't be touching nothing you don't have no business being touching. And if everybody else is touching it, you don't do it because you will get arrested. You will get shot. And you know, we won't necessarily talk about that part. We won't necessarily interrogate it, but it is the way that it is. So so that's definitely something that comes up a lot in different areas. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like growing up, you know, like, I mean, I was in part of Philly that I grew up in, still doesn't have a name. Like, it's just above Strawberry Mansion. But if you scan the QR code at the beginning, you know, like that's right around the corner.
Which was also fire, by the way, that you had QR codes. You
I was going to talk about that.
Yeah. But continue.
You know, and it's just kind of like, fuck, what was I saying?
You were talking about the area.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, it was like stuff happened and things, you know, I mean, like it was murder capital of the country then. But it's just kind of like, I think growing up in the environment, you don't know that there is anything else. So as far as I was concerned, like my parents were still around. There wasn't too much drama. I wasn't hanging out, you know, in any place where I was going to get shot. You know, there were incidents that happened around, but there were, you know, I mean, the hood is such a rich place ultimately, and it's full of so many different types of experiences that, you know, I was like, this is just life. And so, I mean, hopefully that's something that definitely comes across. I think a lot of the section is also about kind of like coming back and trying to find a place in Philly in being disconnected from it. You know, there's a lot of poems about gentrification that are inside of this section, and trying to, you know, reconcile feeling isolated from the place that you grew up in, you know?
Yeah, the thing that I like about the poem, and I always had this image of, you know, the vines that grow, you know, in abandoned buildings in Philadelphia, and then you go to an Ivy League school.
I didn't even know that existed in Philly. My entire life, I had never been on the university's campus. I went there because they gave me money. That's it. Yeah, and my parents didn't care. So it was just like, yo, this was here the whole time. I never saw any rich people before. I never saw Black rich people before. All the Black people were from the suburbs. Like, it was just a whole different thing. Yeah, it was very wild, and kind of, and still reconciling those differences inside of the city, and how, you know, I mean, like, I think that Penn's campus, it's still like the most beautiful campus that I've ever been on, and I think it's more integrated into the city than almost any other campus that I've gone to, and I love, you know, and Philly is a real city of neighborhoods, and I didn't get that when I was growing up because we were just all pretty much in our hood, and that was it. So it's very interesting, you know. I think I've made my peace with it now, but it was very interesting reconciling all of those things.
Yeah, it was fun watching that.
And that can be really difficult, because I know when I went to University of Delaware, very similar to you, I didn't know Newark was a thing, right? Like, I'm just like, there's Wilmington and then there's Pennsylvania. You feel me? Like, and then, you know, I drive a couple minutes, like 20 minutes down 95, and I'm at University of Delaware. And I was determined for the most part not to come back home much while I was in college. And so I often was on campus even during breaks. And when I graduated and came back, like, to live in Wilmington, it definitely was like, it was a culture shock being at University of Delaware. And then it was like a recalibration to be back in Wilmington, because things didn't necessarily look the same. Some of the things that I remember being there weren't there no more. And some of the people I remember being there weren't there no more for various reasons, right? And so it's definitely like, it's like when you have that friend you ain't talked to in like 10 years, and then y'all meet back up for coffee, and it's like, bro, I don't even know you no more. Like, you look like the same person a little bit, you feel me? But at the same time, I have to relearn you. And that can be jarring, especially because you're not the same person, right? Like, a lot of those dudes I hung out with as a child, I don't hang out with no more because they not doing things that I deem healthy for me to do. You feel me? And yeah, and that can be guilt that comes with that, or like shame that comes with that as well. Because like, I'm not repping my hood properly, and like, yeah.
You know what? It's so funny because what you were just saying, this is what good poetry should do. And thank you, Warren, because you trigger a thought in Enoch that just triggers something that I think I want to write about, which is that, you know, when we leave our neighborhoods, you know, it depends, because sometimes we are nearsighted or farsighted. And to me, there are friends that I can see only at a distance because I know that they're just not there for me. And then there are friends that are nearsighted that I don't mind having around me, because you do have to make that decision. And I think in this first section, I see that struggle, and please forgive me, I'm not a psychiatrist, but to me, it just seems to be still unresolved. Or am I misunderstanding that?
Well, no, I mean, you know, this kind of goes back to something that you were saying before, but I don't know, like humility has always been a very important thing of like trying to figure out how to do that. And especially in being able to keep as grounded as possible and to keep connected with Philly as possible, of just always knowing that I don't know shit, you know? Yeah. And that's ultimately, that's the you know, like that's the level, and you kind of have to stay there. And there's always something to learn, and I kind of like be open to that and to the experiences that I didn't have because of where I am. That, you know, that means that sometimes I just got to shut up and just listen, you know? But I mean, like, and you try to do that, and sometimes it comes off and sometimes it doesn't. Like Hood Bar is definitely, you know, last chance isn't there anymore. But it was so beautiful to just be able to be there and to have those moments of recognition from just like, you know, random auntie that's just sitting beside you, and, you know, you pour my drink a little bit heavier, you know, than I necessarily would expect. And there's, you know, just a squad of Black men that are inside there. And it's just, and there's no fear, and there's no apprehension and everything like that. Like that was a really, really great moment, I remember.
Yeah, I love.
I'm glad that you. Yeah, I was about to say, I'm glad that you brought that up, because that opening line, it only seems like chaos if you mostly around white folk. That shit just hella accurate.
Right?
Because it
was a hard thing
like,
to reveal, you know, but it was like, listen, you know, I'm in tech. Like, I mean, I've lived in white worlds for a long time. I think it's one of the things that keeps bringing me back to Philly, because I was just like, I can't exist there, you know. But it just changes. I mean, even just going back, like I never thought that North Philly was that. I mean, called it Beirut. You know, that was the one name that among our group that we had for it, because there were some streets that still are just like rubble, you know. The Bucktooth streets
Yes.
is an image that has haunted me for my entire life as a poet. That's kind of like my first image almost. So, you know, I mean, there was an awareness, but at the same time, like I said, our lives were pretty okay, you know? So it wasn't until kind of coming back and I was like, yo, why are we living like this exactly? Or just why is it like this, you know? And of also recalibrating yourself. It was like, yo, this is just, you know, it is what it is. Like, we're making the best out of it, and it's no reflection necessarily of the people. So kind of like always teetering between these two things of, you know, feeling more of a sense of outrage, definitely, than I ever felt when I was there, that my parents feel, that, you know, like random, like Round the Way Cat has, like, he doesn't really give a fuck, you know, about police brutality sometimes and all of the other shit. It was just like, yo, I'm just here. I'm just trying to live. You know, like if some dude gets in my face and I'm a cop, I'm going to shoot him too. Like, I straight up heard that when I was living over in Southwest Philly. And it's so different, I think, than the ways that people conceptualized, you know, just how Black people are actually in the hood. And just kind of like having that balance of being able to just appreciate and stay inside of the realness, but also have a sense of outrage. And that, you know, it's always going to be a place where people live, and people have a big diversity in the way that they think. And all of that has to be understood on a human level, but also wanting to kind of like expand as a person. I don't think that I mean, you know, especially as a Black man, I don't think it's something that is necessarily going to get solved. And it's not something that I think will ever really be resolved. But it's nice to have conversations like this, and just to continue to grow and to make at least some kind of peace with it in myself. You know?
I have to say, I've got to applaud you. I now have a vision of what's happening in the neighborhood as this dinosaur eating North Philadelphia.
Yes.
So to me, gentrification now takes on a whole new symbol for me, that there's this dinosaur that's eating up our neighborhood. So I really appreciate it. But I just want to go back to the line that Enoch talked about. It only seems like chaos if you mostly around white folks. To me, there's a big lesson there, and maybe it sounds like a public service announcement, but I think that it's so important that in order to find your well-being, especially your mental well-being, you have to find people who are like you, because other people will see how we survive as being dysfunctional thing or to see it as something crazy, when these tools are what makes us survive and makes us live. Because if I had a quarter for every time someone says to me, oh, I don't believe you live in North Philly, I could have retired 10 years ago.
Oh my God. I'm so fucking sick of it.
Yeah. It's like,
and I know
you've heard
I'm
that.
not accepting. Yeah. Oh, constantly. Like the whole idea of being, I was like, no, I'm just a dude. Like, you know, like I'm not the only dude, you know, like from my high school that went to an Ivy League school. Most of the people that I went to high school with that are all from Northwest South Philly and all Black for the most part, because ENS, despite being, you know, like the third best public high school in the city, is mostly Black, are doing great. Most of them are doing great.
We're mostly regular. Most of us are regular.
Yes.
Right? Like, we're not all war-trained, battle-hardened child soldiers. Like, I feel like white people look at the hood and they see like Naruto. And it's like, bro, we not in the village heading in a leaf. Like, we not all slinging crack rocks and shooting craps and like all these things. Like, I remember my first year on campus, I was primarily around white people until I found the Black people. And they were so mind-boggled when I told them that most crime wasn't random. I was like, most of the shootings in Wilmington are between people who know each other and are most likely street active. There aren't that many like random old women and men getting robbed and killed. Like, does that happen? Yeah, for sure, on a occasion. But most of like what you're thinking about is happening is between people who have ongoing relationships with each other, who just have not been taught how to reconcile that in a way that doesn't involve violence.
Yeah.
Right. It's not some place that you just going to show up and you have to be on guard all the time. Like, the hood is, in my experience at least, a lot of dudes be friendly.
Yeah.
It's just what type of energy are you entering the space with that's going to make me perceive you in a certain way. If you come in here and you look scared, I'm going to treat you like you scared.
For sure.
But if you come in here and you look like I'm normal, I'm going to treat you like I'm normal.
Right.
Yeah, come with respect, you know, like come with humility, like don't get into business that you don't need to get into, you know, and everything will be fine, you know, like just be open. And, you know, and you can be goofy, like you can be yourself. Like it's
funny because I think most of the people that I know in my neighborhood and I grew up with are all extremely articulate. And I one of the things I hate is that people say to me, "Oh, you're so articulate," and I said,
I can't stand
not
that.
really. I sound just like everybody else on my block, and you know. And by the way, I'm the Broadneary here on Tioga Street. Right. We're officially known as Franklinville.
Oh, is it?
Which means that gentrification is coming soon.
Yeah. They tried with the neighborhood. They tried to call it Swamp Poodle because apparently that was like an old Dutch name for the neighborhood.
Oh, good Lord.
And they put up little purple flags with a poodle on it. And I was like, yeah, my parents had nothing to do with whatever building came. That dropped off quick, yeah. But
I can ask you both. I want to ask you both a question. Other than and this, and I know you've heard this. I know you both heard it. Other than you're so articulate, what else have people said about you, Warren, when it comes to your writing that kind of just gnaws at you? And the same to you, Enoch.
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing I remember Stacey Ann Shen said that my writing was just a bunch of pretty lists. And pretty lists. I was like, oh yeah, that's nice, you know. That's but you gotta keep writing pretty lists, you know. And I don't know what accent that was supposed to be, but it always stuck with me. And I love Stacey Ann Shen, man. So that kind of hurt my heart a little bit. But it's also something that I've come to own, you know. That stands out in general. Let's see.
I wasn't a very good Oprah because I think I reacted emotionally immediately on that one.
Yeah. That was, you know, I mean, I've made my peace with it. I write the poems that I write. What about you, Enoch? What would people say?
I personally find it frustrating when people are surprised that I'm a good writer in general. Because the first thing I think immediately is, what the hell made you think that I wasn't? Right? Like, you actually shouldn't have any opinion on this until you experience it, right? So it's like, if you're surprised by how it impacted you, like, oh my God, that really hit me, that's cool, that's fine. But if you're like, whoa, like, oh, I didn't expect him to be this talented. So what did you expect then? Did you expect me to not be talented? Did you expect me to be? It's just like, I in general, and this is like a personal thing, I have like a lot of friction with expectation that I don't feel like is warranted. You feel me? Especially like being as though I have been in so many spaces where I feel like there's a version of me that people want, as opposed to just accepting the version that I show up as. And so, yeah, that frustrates me. I did one time have a poet who I shall not name because I greatly respect them.
Oh, was it me?
No.
What I say, what I tell you?
They told me one of the poems in my book, my most recent one, was not a poem, and they was like, you should take this out, right? It was the poem that ends the book. I think it's also titled Supplantation. And I didn't listen to them, obviously, because it's still in the book, and I didn't agree. And it literally is one of the most popular poems in the book. But I was just so thrown by that, because I was like, what? They was like, this sounds more like a journal entry. And I was like, what constitutes that necessarily? I don't know. So yeah, those are probably the two things I could think of off the top that had me like looking like a Mr. Krabs meme.
You know what's really crazy? They're going to say that, I don't know who the person was, but you know what? People celebrate Bukowski for writing in such a clean, almost like journaling kind of way. That's a celebration, but you do it and all of a sudden, that really kind of gnaws at me, is that I think that our intellectual properties are not valued sometimes by ourselves. And so that frustrates the hell out of me. But anyway, I'm sorry that I had a personal moment.
No, it's all good.
Yeah, no, that's
because you know what,
deal with it. It's fine.
Yeah, but through you younger poets, you know, it gives me a chance to, I guess, to learn to breathe and to be heard again, because you're telling the story through your lenses, and I think that you guys, and Warren, I've always admired this about you. You're willing to, as I think it was Thomas Ellis Sayer who said that you learn form so you can destroy it and create your own. And I think that in many ways that's what I see with you, is that there is this understanding of so-called European or Western literature, which is another joke I'd like to talk about one day. But you know those things, and then you kind of reconstruct it to be your own. And it isn't always in the, and I don't mean this in a negative way, it's not always in the Amiri Baraka way or the Maya Angelou way.
Oh yeah.
Which I think is another pigeonholing that occurs. So how did you find that freedom just to write and say, you know, fuck it?
Oh, you know what? Number one, first poet that I really dug was Emily Dickinson back in high school, for sure. Because it was the first time that I saw poetry that it was, number one, you know, she didn't really care if anybody read it. She just kept it in a big chest. And, you know, it was mostly, you know, released after she died. I was like, that's just Doug. Like, it was beautiful that, like, and it was very clear, I felt, in her writing, that she wrote completely for herself. And she did not really feel beholden to like rhyme or strict structure. The structure of the poems always worked for them. You could read into it endlessly. And that was the first time that I really encountered poetry like that and discussed it actively inside of a class. And then in college, you know, so that kind of started me in a lot of ways of just being interested in poetry and making it a practice to write. And then when I get to college, you know, I was just immersing myself in everything. And I got Gertrude Stein's Tinder Buttons, and I listened to MF Doom for the first time. And both of their approaches to language felt very similar to me. And for me, that kind of like, I love modernist poetry, like, just it's kind of like that way. And and obviously, like Amiri Baraka and in the Black arts movement, in some ways I think is the pinnacle of a lot of the things that, beat poets and surrealist poets and other people inside of the Western canon were doing. There's no real separation, I think, but it was really, really cool to see, to see Gertrude Stein and kind of like the same kind of construction and like language and the play of it and being on the edge of an idea. Also like LP, like everything that Def Jux was doing at that point, like everything was coming out of Raucous Records at that point. It like that, like in a lot of ways, hip hop and modernist poetry gave you this freedom. It was like, language is fun. And you can do, and if you start there and you start with the playfulness, then anything else that you want is going to come. But you have to give yourself room to just like write and enjoy and luxuriate in words.
Yeah.
So that was
by the way, that was not an attack on either Amiri or Meyer.
Oh, absolutely.
That I actually had a somewhat relationship with, because even they used to get sick and tired of people holding them in such high esteem when all they wanted people to do was write, tell your truth, tell your story, which I think you do a great job. And Enoch, I don't have your book, so that is something that I will publicly announce. I don't have, but now I have a chance to fix that problem.
Yes.
I
Follow me.
Now, the thing that we didn't talk about was A Strange Place for Snow. I think that's the section that we didn't talk about.
Let's talk about it, yeah. So that was after Autoimmune, and it's kind of meant to be, in some ways, a release afterwards. And it's kind of like it was really interesting and kind of coming to terms with all of this trauma of trying to figure out, sexuality and to figure out relationships and all of that stuff within that context. So that's why that section kind of comes after it for it.
So in this section,
let's talk about it.
This is the only poem so far in the book where I was genuinely lost. And so I want you to elaborate. Talk to me about the Handjob poem. I read this John multiple times. I was like, yo, I know it's something here, but I don't know what it is. I'm not sure what parts I'm supposed to be keying in on. And it might be like the part of me that's like potentially on the spectrum and it's like, needing I'm like grounding concepts first type of thing. So if I can't figure out why something is happening, I'm just like confused. And so I'm like, I see him saying first and next. So I feel like the poem is supposed to be steps, but at the same time, the steps is not making sense. And so I was all over the place. So yeah, talk to me about Handjob.
It's all good. This and Give Chase, I feel like, they're very much, they're poems that are meant to be like sexy and sexual, but once again, working with the language, it's supposed to be fun. And it's about, and so, there's a lot of things inside of here. I don't know, like when I think about stroking my dick, it's very sensual, you know what I mean? It's about kind of, especially as a man, of being able to describe your own sexuality and your sexual experience as something that's just like, it's like feeling sand going through your hands, it's cutting construction paper with a really good pair of scissors. And, when I'm talking about, holding a glass bottle, like full of water or something, like there's some direct images that are in there too. And the same thing, by the time that I wrote it, it had a different title originally, and I was like playing around with it. I don't remember what it was, but similarly, the squeeze bottles of sour cream, though only the ones that pleat inward in the middle, like toothpaste tubes. Like, that feels very much like a phallic in your hand kind of feel to it. But once again, it's like, you have to read into it a little bit. And I like that about it. And it also is just like, it's just about feeling good and being okay with it, just feeling good. And I guess in some ways kind of like detaching it from from sex in the way that we typically think about it, especially when we think about like male masturbation, was really it felt good. It just felt good. So I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna put it in. Yeah.
Okay, I'm following. That makes a lot of sense to me. Word.
Yeah, and it's okay. I mean, hopefully, at the very least, it felt good to hear the words together, and that's why that's always kind of like, you know, that's always the first first step with it.
Yeah, the imagery was definitely there.
I think that it does what it should as a poem. If it, you know, if it made you go, "What the hell's going on?" then that means it made you feel something. And I think that that's something that a lot of poets make the mistake of. They want people to like their work. You don't necessarily need people to like your work. You need them to read it, and it doesn't have an emotional effect on them. If it leaves them confused, and that's an emotion that you're having.
It's not empathetic, you know. And even more than that, I think it's important that you like your work. Like, you know, I mean, like,
that's all that matters.
Absolutely.
That is
I
the
think
most
you should
important.
Like your work and say, okay, how can I better it?
Yeah.
Or what do I need to say next?
Yeah. Or what am I trying to do, but, you know, but I haven't quite got there yet. I mean, for me, like for any artist that I really love, it's like you can see that arrow and it was like your shit's good, but at the same time, you're trying to get to a place that you're not quite at. And definitely with poetry, because it's raw. I mean, like, it feels like programming to me. Like, even though, you know, with this book especially, you know, it's about just, I have language, you know what I mean? I have words, I have the ability, you know, so like, what can we do with this? Because it's a tremendous amount of power on something that exists outside of culture or anything. It was like, we just have this, you know?
What has your experience been like? And if, you know, obviously, if you don't want to answer this question, that's fine. What has your experience been like exploring the eroticism of your body, specifically as like a Black male, and, you know, growing up where we're in spaces where sexual acts are encouraged, but not the expression and indulgence in sexuality, because those are two very different things.
Absolutely.
So yeah, especially with like, so I think similar to me, we both have like childhood sexual trauma. So especially like in context of also unpacking your sexual trauma as well.
And for me, it also comes out of like growing up in the church. Like, I mean, I was Jehovah's Witness, hardcore, third generation coming up, as Elijah knows. And so for me, you know, like, I mean, sex, there was, I mean, even like the concept of, there's definitely a strong kind of like masculine role that isn't always healthy, that's inside of that context, but you weren't encouraged to be sexual at all. Like, you know, I mean, it was extreme shame. And I think that's not a, you know, and it kind of like, it's the one thing that can just completely get you cut off from everything that you know and everything that you understand. So that more than anything else for me was kind of like where I came into kind of like thinking about sex, which, you know, I mean, but at the same time, like, you're growing up and, you know, you live in this really over sexualized environment. So you're still drawn to it. And even, you know, just with, you know, like, even like with queerness and like with homosexuality, like that was something that also I felt like I had some kind of relationship with when I was younger. At the very least, like, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of like blatant homophobia, honestly, that happened inside of my church and with my family, but I always like responded very strongly against it. And so I knew that there was something there, you know, from very early on. And so, yeah, I mean, like, it was really interesting, you know, I mean, like, I don't know. Yeah. Super late bloomer, you know, actually coming into the role of having sex as a Black man was I didn't realize how I was supposed to be. And of just kind of like, you know, there's certain expectations that have everything to do with what women want and have nothing to do with patriarchy that come up very early on when you start having sex. And I think there's an assumption with men and with Black men specifically that that's what you want. Like, I didn't know I was always supposed to top. And I didn't know what I wanted because I'm just a person, you know? who's just kind of like trying to figure out sex for the first time, like ultimately everybody, you know? Yeah, so I mean, it was very interesting kind of like being introduced to the role, like primarily through my interactions with women, and not necessarily wanting it, and having a history of having sexual experiences with women that I didn't necessarily want, but didn't know how to like express consent for myself even. And also feeling like it's something I'm supposed to like for, you know, reasons that are complicated and just like are similar, but just very different from, you know, like a lot of female experiences. So yeah, it's been very interesting and still kind of, you know, yeah, it's an ongoing journey of just kind of like figuring out and accepting what it is that I like, and not feeling shame and not feeling, you know, like it's gonna come back, or that I can't be in a relationship, you know, because I am like more honest about who I am and the roles that I actually do want to take or don't want to take, and of expressing my consent without having fear that it's going to blow back at me, which I think is something that a lot of men face in subtle ways. But, you know, we aren't really given the language to be able to say no and to advocate for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are ways that, as a whole, patriarchy, and I'm speaking in draft right now.
Totally, I feel. Thank you.
It erases everybody's consent, everyone, because, you know, we obviously know the ways and the statistics around sexual assault for women. You feel me? So that goes without saying. And also what you're saying in the sense of like, what if I don't want to play?
Huge.
Yeah.
Sexual assault for Black men like is so much higher in comparison, and for domestic violence too. I mean, like you know, like the majority of, and you know, I mean, I have a lot of references to The Man Not, which I recommend everybody read. It's an amazing kind of like anthropological study of gender and masculinity, like from anthropologists in like the 1800s and 1700s, like how they actually looked at gender and how that influences kind of where it was. It was just very unexpected. And there were, you know, lots of, and it comes out of like research that was done with Black men who have suffered from sexual assault. And yeah, you know, it's just, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's easy. I think we live in a really difficult time to be able to feel like we're not that, you know, to be able to advocate for our own humanity inside of these situations has to ultimately come at the expense of something else. And it has to be wrapped in a very specific kind of language that's not just about the hurt that's happening to humans, you know?
Yeah. And it's a very, I'm very big on everything that happens micro happens macro. And it's very much like when you have two people who are in relationship and they both need or have things they need to heal from, but they don't have that language to be able to navigate the healing together. And when I think about some of the frictions that I see come up, specifically as it relates to gender, it very much looks that way to me, specifically with Black people, right?
Yes,
because that's the only group of people I care about for the most part. So it's like, yeah, we don't have the language to like mediate and meet in the middle, because everybody feels like their experience is not being given enough space. And so when we come into a lot of situations, that's what we're gonna fight for, right? Like, I'm gonna fight for my space, you're gonna fight for your space, Joe Schmo's gonna fight for his space, and we're all in here fighting for the same space, when that actually isn't. And you know, all of these things, I'm not saying any of this shit is easy, because all of it is, when you're steeped in it, it's difficult to see. But it's like, if we all approached conversations from a more healing centered space, I think a lot of these things would look different, but we don't. I think a lot of times it's like, what's your pain? And how is my pain worse than that? Or like, what's your pain? I don't necessarily believe that's your pain. So let's go through and unpack all the ways that, you know, poke holes in your story and figure out all the ways this may not be true. when it's just like, or we could validate each other's experiences. Also, like, not project, right? I've had conversations with people, both men and women and otherwise, where it's like I'm talking about my own experience and then they're projecting themselves into it. It's like, I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about you. I'm just talking about the person that I had an interaction with that harmed me, right? This is not a general social commentary on everything that goes into all these different dynamics. It is just commentary on what I need to heal from specifically. Right. And can we rest and sit in that conversation as opposed to blowing it up and making, I feel like sometimes a lot of conversations become social statements as opposed to just conversations. And it's like, yo, look, that shit is not going to help me right now. It's not going to do nothing for me becoming a more fuller and actualized person. And like, I think, and this is, you know, a slight tangent as well. I think that a lot of the harm that is caused statistically looks very different when we are not, how can I word it? Okay, erase that. I think a better way to say it is that I don't know anybody that harms people, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally, that has not also been in a state of being harmed, right? And so what does it look like for us communally or separate, right, to deal with the harms that we've experienced so we're no longer in these positions of causing harm? Does that make sense? Because I'm talking in draft, I'm like thinking through it as I'm speaking.
I kind of know where I hear what you're saying. I think that sometimes there's several things I think that we need to do. I think identifying what's happened is important in that, and that's one thing that happens. And I think that we all learn how to identify pain. I think we've all learned to sometimes even up the ante and say, hey, my pain was more, my pain was less. But I think that what I don't see us doing a lot of is wanting to be healed. We all say that we need to be healed, but being healed means working hard. And sometimes it's easier to identify that you've been harmed and sit in that space and not say, okay, take a deep breath. What is healing? What does healing look like to me? How do I heal? What is it that I need to do? And I think that sometimes it's easier for us to identify our harm and not seek out healing. So I kind of hear what you're saying. And it's funny because I was reading, as you were talking, I couldn't help but read Fuckboi. And and yeah, and believe it or not, it's through reading that just now that I'm like, oh, you know what it is? You know, we don't often have the energy to heal. So it goes back to the whole thing that often people say to me, oh, I pray that this gets better. I pray that this, and I always tell people, don't pray that it gets better. Pray that I have enough strength to deal with whatever happens.
And we also don't always feel like we have the space, I think, as well. What were you gonna say, Warren?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's at least two different threads that I love. This is an amazing conversation. Oh my God, where do I even want to go? Well, I'll go with this. So what in Fuckboi specifically, like speaks to healing for you? I'm very interested in that take.
Don't laugh at me, but it's the fact that you write about this. He says, not until I was 33. And first of all, you're talking about a bathhouse, and then you're talking about not until I was 33. And I think that what kind of hit me with that is, as Black males, we're supposed to be so highly sexualized that we're supposed to know this stuff from the moment that we come through the vagina. We're supposed to know all about the vagina or whatever. So it's like for you to say that it wasn't until I was 33, which is, I often say, is the year of Christ, but the fact that it doesn't hit you until this later date, and that you're willing to just simply say, hey, this is when it was for me, and not play into the thing that you're supposed to have been smart sexually, you know, or advanced sexually. I think that that's what kind of got to me.
It was definitely good, and kind of like working through just, and you know, also, you know, all true stories and about a very dear friend. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to be able to work out. I mean, there's other lines in there, you know.
I experimented. I love that one.
What Black men are, you know, an experiment and trust. He loves Black men. And this is about a, you know, like a white friend of mine, former friend, unfortunately. I really love this poem. It also makes me think of the introduction that comes after this, which is a really powerful moment for me. So I took a trip around the world about 2 years ago, and I ended up in Johannesburg for part of it. And crazy ass day, but I ended up going out with two different Zambian men. And both of them identified as bisexual. One had been married for a long time, and the other was basically gay. But for them, it was just very complicated, because one had sex with a woman and had a child, but hadn't had sex with women for like a long time. And the other one, had sex with men at some point, but was also like happily married and out inside of the marriage. And was like, so how do we actually like define these lines, and do they even matter? And kind of like talking to them in an African context. So it was a fascinating conversation in general, but they were talking about one men's group that met. And the only question, as I said in there, was, what was your first moment of sexual contact? Which I'd never been in a space that was asked of anyone before, and I hadn't really thought about it myself. And certainly not, you know, like, what are the answers that you get in a room full of men? You know, because at that point, like, you're having to talk about your experience as boys. And I don't think that we're really used to seeing, you know, we're not used to seeing Black men specifically as sexually vulnerable inside of our society, even though there's so much history for it. And it's always been true, you know, and it's a part of the over-sexualization of kind of like the Black male archetype that has never been like a lived experience exactly. You know, it's a everything is just a reaction to an idea that was put inside of our heads. But you know, but to be in a room and to say, all right, well, you know, because for the most part, your first contact with sex of any kind is happening at a place where you don't really know what sex is, which is the state of every single human being. And
but the question is, what is sex?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why they called it sexual contact. So it was for them to define. So for me, you know, my first moment of sexual contact was my molester. Like, that was the first time, you know, I was young enough.
Same.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like, I didn't really think of myself as a sexual being until that happened. And it deeply impacted like just the way that I kind of like conceptualized sex after that.
And depending on
conversation.
Go ahead, Enoch.
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, and depending on age and who you tell these things to, that is an experience that would be applauded, right? Like, and that's another thing. It's like, because of our hypersexualization and like adultification at a young age, is where I'm not even going to say almost, we are inspired to like run head first into sexual assault. For real. It's like, you know, you have the teacher that's like 30 and you're 12, and if something happens, everybody's like, that's great. She's unhealthy, right? But like, you did a good thing, right? You took down your teacher. That's what's up, right? And it's like, just that normalization.
I mean, that depends too, though. I mean, like, because that was not my experience, you know. Number one, because I was 11. So, you know, I mean, it was just kind of like, and because I came up in the church, all I felt was just overwhelming shame and fear that God was going to be against me, which I think is also a very common feeling among Black people and Black men in our community. I think that has to, like, to immediately kind of go to the reason that all of these things are happening is because of things that men are doing to themselves, especially when you're talking about Black men. Like, I'm not saying that conversation doesn't need to happen, but it's just, if I feel like, there are all of these tools around kind of like talking about consent and talking about self-love and talking about self-care. And it just feels like a lot of our conversations about them as they relate to Black men are always about responsibility and not about making space.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think just further goes into more of archetypes that exist around like how we as men are perceived, because if we are supposed to always be in control, then we're the ones that make the space, right? It's no one's job to make space.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's kind of the assumption, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel like we don't really look at it that way for any other group, like as we think about social, like social justice right now, it's all about being inclusive. It's all about reaching out. It's all about empathy. And, I mean, like Black men are, Black cis men specifically are one of the most like historic, like oppressed groups in the American consciousness, and kind of like the effect of those archetypes still weigh so heavily. I mean, all you can do is like look at, like police brutality to kind of get at that. It affects all of us every single day, but we don't, it doesn't feel like there is an approach societally. The only way that you can combat that is with empathy and by making space in the society for it. And it's like, you just don't see it.
The sexuality for the Black male, or for Blacks in general, what I was saying though is sex a conversation. And the reason why I was saying that is that and I hate to keep going back to slavery, but unfortunately history is how we got to the present. And I think that with Blacks, or the African, when they came to America, the idea of sexuality, or the idea of sex, that power was kind of taken away. And you were told that you had to do certain things. Like earlier you were talking, Warren, and it kind of reminded me of like a modern day buck, where basically you're told to do certain things and to be certain things. And I think that the reason why I think that we are in such role-playing positions in our lives is because the way that we were allowed to be was as a function and not an emotion. So sex became a function for Black folks and not an emotional expression. And I think that still is happening today. And if you're a Black male and you find a reason to be emotionally attached to someone, they'll say you're p-whipped. And so I think I don't even know where we go from here, or how do we heal from here. I do think that.
Well, I started by making a poem about handjobs. That was
I mean, I think it was a good start.
You know what?
You
I
feel
was about
me?
to say the same thing. I think that poem is the beginning of a healing process.
That's what it's meant to be.
Yeah, and I think that's what we have to do. We've got to learn. We have to. First of all, I think that Black men do not believe they deserve to be healed.
I completely agree.
I think that that's the first thing, is that we do not believe we deserve to be healed. And that is where I think we need to start, is that we deserve to be healed. We deserve to be
most of us don't, I would argue, in alignment with all this being said, most of us don't really see ourselves to begin with. So much about the concept, and I'm going back to the social concept of masculinity, is just about currency, right? Social currency. Like, these are the things that reinforce my manhood, and all of that is performance, right? And in that regard, if I'm so focused on the performance of masculinity, and it could be for various different reasons, right? Like it may not even necessarily be about the social currency, right? We were talking about growing up in poverty earlier, and there's a survival aspect to carrying that social currency as well, right? All of these things also enforce me not being my genuine self, or being my genuine self in a specific way that is socially acceptable to the circles that I'm navigating, right? And so then it's like, in that regard, if I don't have the toolkit to see myself, it doesn't surprise me that I can't see anybody else either, right? Like all of it is like cyclical to me, and all of it correlates. And I feel like there is a lot that, going back to like Warren talking about starting with the poem, I think there is a lot that we can do for ourselves that just cultivate the spaces where we don't have to do that shit. For real. Because I also think about, like, and not to be too cliche, but like, you know, it's a common thing that, you know, sometimes it's like, if you're not getting what you want, maybe you're not asking the right people type of thing, right? And I think that there are certain things that we need that we're not asking for from the right people, if I'm being honest. And that's not like a fault type of statement, like, oh, you know, it's we're not doing enough type of thing. It's just like an objective. I think maybe we need to start with just like asking these things from the niggas we in community with, and then get a safe space there. And then maybe we can talk to everybody else about making that space.
I mean, I hope that, you know, the poem is not in here, but there's one poem I have that was like, you know, there's no upward mobility without a nigga to stand on, you know? Like, I mean, like, to a certain extent, I think that there is a reason why those spaces don't exist, and that it is, you know, there is a general, you know, value in society and just having, you know, an animal that you're better than, you know? And you know,
I mean, capitalism that's inherent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we are a Western culture, and everything that we do is still coming out of the West. And so we, you know, to all levels, for any thought, you know, or social science, I think that comes out of the United States, like, you got to be humble, and you got to not think that. That's a whole nother thing. So we gotta, you know, we were supposed to stop this at 4 for sure. I'm gonna go through the timestamp stuff. You know, I am completely like thrilled with all of that, everything that we've been talking about today, and I can't wait to see what the conversations are afterwards about kind of what we cut. If there is there anything else inside of the poem, like any, you know, like closing questions, thoughts, poems that people wanted to just like hit on?
This is back in, it's right. Yeah, it's the first little blurb in Autoimmune. Actually, this is I think this is an even better question, because this covers the whole book. There are poems that you have that have absolutely no title, and they're kind of just like interludes. Because the poem I was about to pull from was one of those, and so I was like, instead of asking about the specific poem, let me just ask about these in general. And I can say the thing about the specific poem too, but what was the thought process behind throwing those in?
Yeah, I mean, I love that in a book. I mean, I love that in a book. When you're making a series of poems, you can do a lot of things with how the progression works and the different feel that things have. I think in the layout, it's not doing exactly, because not only do those poems not have a title, but they're also justified on the bottom. And that's to kind of give it a different kind of, like, it's supposed to be like a different mental space, sort of. And, you know, so it's kind of like the Autoimmune poems are more like just like stories, and then those are kind of like reflections. So, you know, I don't think that we're completely successful in it, in all honesty, but it's meant to kind of be like, you know, it's a back of the mind kind of thing. You know, there's kind of this space for it. But in general, you know, I mean, I love to, when I'm working in series, I love to be able to mess around with different types of voices and how you're making different voices speak on the page from poem to poem.
Word. If I could offer something up, because I heard you say you didn't think it necessarily fully carried out what you intended. I think one of the things as a reader that would have been good for me is if there was a visual cue, like image wise, that like maybe the poem is written inside a box, or just something that lets me know it's separate. Because like for the one right after Autoimmune, I know that this is its own thing because the very next poem has a title.
Right.
But then for Autoimmune 3,
Yes.
I actually didn't know that poem was that short until you read it, because I
Absolutely.
thought the rest of it was the same. So yeah, like a visual cue that might help facilitate that if you do it again, like in the future.
Absolutely.
Because it's a cool idea.
Yeah.
I was thinking that it kind of reminded me of an old Bible where you have I think I forgot the term that it's called. It's something called, it's writing that's in the margin. I think it's I forgot if the term is marginina or something like that. Where if the words were, let's say, written horizontally, or I mean, believe it or not, our minds will quickly be able to twist it around, but it is a visual signal that says that this is separate. It's like a concordance, I guess you could say. Because I know that when I was, what I did with your poem, as I was reading them, I hope that you never see the book, the book you gave me. Thank you, I appreciate it. Because you will see that there may be a word that you have, and I may have written it down, and I start writing poems on the side of your poem.
This is exactly that's the dream.
So yeah, so I mean, because there was one where you have these images, and I just, I like this image, so I just start writing down on the side. So I think that maybe that might be one way to get that across a little bit more. I just sort of enjoyed reading the whole thing, but I did not know I did not know that intent until just said it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, we could have worked that a little bit more, and that's a conversation between, like I said, this is the first time that I worked with a designer for layout. And so that was definitely a very interesting, very vulnerable process of having them go through and ask these very, particular type of questions about my trauma and how it's going to look. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely, finishing this book just makes me that much more excited for the next project.
Yes.
And, yeah. I'm very excited about just like putting out more books of all kinds, like after this. So don't think I'm not going to be, like knocking on your door, Enoch. We have some conversations we need to have, period. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I always enjoy the talk. So, I'll be down as long as you schedule it.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm not good. Some of my friends still try to hit me with what you doing today, and I'm like, I don't live that life no more.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I need at least like 2 days before I do
At
anything.
minimum, at least like 2 days for sure.
No, I hear that 100%. All right, fellas. I mean, I guess that is about it. If y'all could both send me, I guess I'll stop the recording now. That was more